The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, dedicated to creating access to financial well-being for local people, businesses, and communities. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar in Hatfield, dedicated to custom solar installations, electric vehicle charging solutions, and reliable long-term system support. Northeast-solar.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, remote problem solving and how it relates to our greater human condition with the last show of Chester Theater's 2026 season, Dear Alien.
Plus, legal weed and its impact on the states that have decriminalized it in a new study from the Parabola Center.
That study has a fantastic name, and Mr. Universe has us looking at Earth.
Or rather, new findings on a super Earth. And the Carpenters.
That Carpenters thing coming to...
Rainy days and Mondays always get me.
There you go.
Oh, the Carpenters thing coming into the UMass Fine Arts Center.
Yeah. I thought about you.
I should go to it. I love the Carpenters.
Yeah, maybe I'll come with you too, because I love the Carpenters.
How can you not love the Carpenters?
I know.
It's really Sonic Youth that made me love the Carpenters, because their cover of Superstar, and I was like, it made me reappreciate the corniness of the Carpenters, and I was like, God, this is amazing.
Corniness of the Carpenters.
Yeah, they're a little corny. In a good way.
In a very good way, you know.
And then their version of Sing from Sesame Street. Sing us. Oh my God.
And Alien Song.
Oh yes, we did a
We have
whole
talked
show
about it,
about the
yeah.
Carpenters, calling occupants of interplanetary most extraordinary craft. Anyway, that Carpenters moment, brought to you by the UMass Fine Arts Center, where you can see the Carpenters experience. Sometime it's not really brought to you by them. UMass astronomer, Mr. Universe, Salman Hamid, the founder of Kainat Studios, here at your Amherst kitchen table. You will be teaching a class at UMass this coming semester, which starts very soon. Now that Hampshire is winding down, we met with the Hampshire Next people on the show last week. They were very interesting. We'll see how that materializes.
And I closed my office officially, cleared out my office.
After 20 years?
Yes, after 21 years. Yeah, so that's a big chapter that closed down, but I will be teaching a class on life, death, and ownership on the moon. That will be in the fall semester at UMass.
You have found, or astronomers have found, a super Earth. What's so super about it compared to our own Earth?
Okay, so as a clarification, super Earths have been found, so that's not an issue. Super Earths are planets around other stars. So this is where the exoplanets, which we have talked about many times, and over 6,000 exoplanets have been discovered. And some of them are a couple of times bigger than the Earth, but they are smaller than a planet like Neptune. And you would go like, okay, so can you tell me like a similar planet in the solar system? Well, super Earths do not exist in our solar system.
We just have regular Earth.
We have regular Earth and
Fun size Earth.
so super Earths, we don't have that sample in our solar system. And that in some sense makes it exciting when you study these planets, but also make it problematic because we don't know, we haven't studied them closely to think about whether their surfaces are completely rocky, are they gaseous, or what is happening on these planets. Nevertheless, potentially they can have life on it, because if they are rocky, sure, they are a little bit bigger than the Earth, but they can potentially have life. But what is exciting is that about a month ago, or a few weeks ago actually, there was a paper that got published which announced a discovery of atmosphere around one of these super Earths. And this is the first time an actual atmosphere has been detected around potentially a rocky planet. So again, I'm being very careful about it because we don't exactly know if it's fully rocky or not. But I should actually mention that it's not just that, but this particular super Earth is also in the habitable zone of its star. And habitable zone is the distance of the planet from the star where water can potentially exist in liquid form.
So Mars is rocky, but does not have an atmosphere.
It does.
Does it?
Yeah, but it is only 1% of the Earth. So it's much thinner atmosphere. It did not retain for many reasons because the size of Mars is also smaller. It actually lost the atmosphere overall to space.
So the idea would be that you could maybe terraform Mars and create an atmosphere that would be livable for humans someday. So is this super Earth, how far away is it? And do we think it has the kind of atmosphere that humans or other life forms systems could exist in?
If you look at the headlines, and I'm going to come to the headlines in a second, then it would look like, oh, this is like atmosphere. In fact, even New York Times, the headline was like, atmosphere on an Earth-like planet. Well, not exactly. But the atmosphere that they have detected is definitely not Earth-like. So no, you cannot live on it. But the fact that there is an atmosphere is an interesting aspect, because then you would find other potentially planets, rocky planets or super Earths, where that means that atmosphere is around. This is a relatively close by exoplanet, close to around 50 light years away. This particular planet orbits a small red star. So it's called red dwarf stars, which are the most abundant in the galaxy. It's a much smaller star than our sun, a few thousand degrees cooler. This particular planet is about 5 to 6 times the mass of the Earth, and about 1.5 times bigger than the Earth. It is in a distance from its star where water can exist in liquid form, but because the star is a bit cooler than our sun, that means that it is orbiting closer than we are. So it takes about 25 days for it to orbit its star. Red dwarf stars are the most abundant in the universe, and people question whether there could be life that easily around those stars or not, because these stars are usually considered to be active, meaning to say they have a lot of magnetic activity, they have flares, and the planet has to be close to it if life requires liquid water, and if you have to be in habitable zone to have liquid water. And in fact, this particular planet is also what is called tidally locked, meaning to say the same side of the planet faces the star. And so same thing like the moon for us.
We're tidally locked with the moon.
With the moon, so we only see the same. Does that create problem for life, and so on and so forth? So there are all of these questions in there. Nevertheless, what was interesting about this particular observation was that astronomers detected an atmosphere. There have been atmospheres that have been discovered, like gaseous planets, big ones, but around this particular star, which is in the habitable zone, and it's Earthish. But what they found was helium. And it seems to be leaking from the atmosphere as well, which is actually kind of cool. Like,
a helium atmosphere? Everybody sounds so funny on that planet.
That is exactly right.
And whether there can be life. One question was that whether there would be atmospheres on planets that orbit around these red dwarf stars. And one of the reasons why this had come up was one of the most intriguing star system that we have talked about before, and a lot of people are interested. It's called TRAPPIST-1, or TRAPPIST-1, I should say. TRAPPIST-1. I always bring I don't know, that's a weird accent. I don't even know where it comes from. TRAPPIST-1. So TRAPPIST-1, it has multiple planets in the habitable zone, and those are actually close to the size of the Earth. And those are rocky planets. James Webb Space Telescope has spent a lot of time looking for atmosphere around those planets, and so far it has ruled out, I think, 3 or 4 of them now. Suddenly there is a panic that comes in. Oh my goodness, are we the only one with atmosphere with rocky planet? Here is an example where you have a planet that is a little bit bigger than the Earth, and it has an atmosphere, but the atmosphere right now, it looks like made up of, a lot of it is helium.
But who cares? Because life, we're only talking about life as we know it. Plants on this planet breathe carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. There could be some sort of creature there that breathes helium, or maybe is off-gassing the helium, which has created that atmosphere in the first place.
It's the same kind of thing when we are talking about super Earth, which we didn't know that those category existed. In the same way, the likelihood that we are going to find life, the kind of life that is here and the kind of things that it uses, is pretty low. I mean, you can find other things and life surviving in conditions that are very different. And even here, as you were mentioning, sort of like, the range of temperatures and the range of conditions in which life survives here is actually really broad. And would it have sort of like similar kind of life? Well, maybe completely different. So you are absolutely right. And in fact, some people have suggested that, you can have yeast or E. coli survive in these kind of planets as well. But this is just the beginning. What drives me a little bit nuts is when people start to look for, we still haven't found any really Earth-like, Earth 2.0 or whatever. And are we the only one? I don't understand this question, because just in our own galaxy, which has a couple of 100 billion stars, the estimate is that there are over 10 trillion, with a T, planets. in our own galaxy. We are looking for, so far the ones we have found are like really close by, and we have found over 6,000.
Which is a lot, but not compared to a trillion.
Right, so people again immediately say, we may be unique. Well, no! Here we are talking about 10 trillion planets in the Milky Way galaxy, let alone that there are over 100 billion galaxies, each with trillions of planets. So, it makes me mad. We have just starting to look for these things. It's been only a few decades where we have started to find actual planets out there. So to say that atmospheres are going to be unlikely around rocky planets, to me, it doesn't make much sense.
Which is funny because we are often skeptical about the potential for life on other planets. Although we both believe that it exists, we have no evidence of it. One thing that we do know now is that there's at least one rocky planet that has an atmosphere, just like our rocky Earth has an atmosphere.
And if people want to know this star, they have names. So this is LHS 1140, that's a star, and a little b, that's identifying a planet. But with the headlines, as you mentioned, it's not exactly an Earth-like planet. It's bigger than the Earth. It's a super Earth. But I was looking for how other people have covered it, and the New York Post headline, I think, got the cake for that. It said, quote, aliens most likely to inhabit super Earth exoplanet with all, and again, quote, essential ingredients for life, astronomers. Okay? And I was like, wow, this is crazy headline, because most of that is not true, except they were very good about super Earth. And then I read the article. It was totally fine. The article had no mention of any of this stuff.
You need to draw somebody in to read the article. The headline, that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
Don't always read the article. Don't just read the headline.
That's exactly right.
And then go listen to the Carpenters, because once we communicate with this planet 50 light years away, they are going to want to make a contact with us. They are our friends.
And they will be on top of the world.
They might be our friends.
We are your friends. It says it in the Carpenters song.
I have thoughts about this. Playing it. But speaking of that, in fact, a play gets its second outing in Chester to close out its season, and we'll speak with playwright Liz Duffy-Adams and artistic director of Chester Theatre, Michelle Ung-Hendricks, about the production of Dear Alien.
They are our friends. But first, the impact of legal toking with Dr. Faith English as we speak with her about her recent study on the impacts of legalized cannabis in the Bay State and beyond.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Visiting Angels West Springfield, providing home care for seniors and veterans in Hampden County, including Angel Care, short-term post-surgery support for seniors and their loved ones. visitingangels.com/West Springfield.
I'm at the Pizza Hut. What? I'm at the Taco Bell. What? I'm at the combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell.
When I saw a report that had the title, I like not having to go behind the dumpster at Taco Bell, I thought,
Yay, science!
we have to talk about this. And we are here in Northampton, the marijuana center of Massachusetts, talking about a new study, Consumer Perspectives in States with Established Cannabis Markets. Hey, there's like 15 on this.
The center of Massachusetts.
Well, maybe we'll ask Faith English, who has co-authored this interestingly titled study. Thanks for joining us here. We're at the outside tables outside Familiars on Summer on Strong, where they shut down the street and people are, it's like very European cafe vibe.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So is Northampton the marijuana center of Massachusetts?
I don't know that I would necessarily say that. I suppose we could do a deep dive and look at the Cannabis Control Commission's website and track all of the licenses that are currently active in the state, and we could make a map.
We were certainly one of the first, if not the first. I remember former Mayor David Narkowitz left the March for the Food Bank so he could go to the pot shop by the Rotary and bought a marijuana candy bar that he claims he didn't eat and that he framed. Way to go, Bill Clinton. I didn't inhale.
Yeah, no, Northampton, and there was one other town, somewhere like in central Mass, I think, that had, these were the first two dispensaries to open in November 2018.
And then there was what felt like a glut of pot shops in Northampton, and I think people that know the tiniest bit about business knew that that would shake itself out, like seeds and stems.
It's shaken itself out in a way that actually comes to light in this study.
Yeah.
Let's delve into that, shall we?
So I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University and also a researcher with the Parabola Center for Law and Policy, which is a nonprofit organization based in Eastern Mass and founded by Shalene Title, who was one of the original Cannabis Control Commissioners as they were drafting the regulations in 2016. And Shalene wanted us to do a research study that explored the perceptions and experiences of people who live in states with really well-established cannabis markets. So cannabis policies continue to expand and evolve across the country. I think there are 24 states and Washington, D.C. that have legal adult use, but this is still an ongoing process. Policies are continuing to change. It's a conversation happening at the federal level, but we don't really know how folks are experiencing legal weed in states that have had a really established market. And so we designed a study that included states that have had at least 5 years of active sales. And we were really intentional about those active sales because here in Massachusetts, like as you guys know, we passed it in 2016, but it wasn't until 2018 until the dispensaries started opening up. So that ended up being 9 states across the U.S. and we interviewed folks who live in those states. The eligibility criteria were that you had to live in one of the 9 states, obviously be over the age of 21, and be willing to share either your opinions about or experiences with cannabis legalization. You didn't have to be a cannabis user, although all but one of the people we spoke with were cannabis users. And it's just a really exciting way to center the voices of people who are living with these policies and hear from them directly about how they think it's going, what's working, what's not working, what could be improved.
I think it was most interesting to read this study and find that in your sample, they kind of align with me as someone who doesn't partake in cannabis at all. Those opinions are basically the same.
Mm-hmm. We definitely tried to capture a broad representation of folks, and what we learned is that there isn't an average consumer. Cannabis consumers look totally different. Some people use cannabis once a year. Some people use it once a month. Some people use it all day, every day, and it really runs the gamut by age, by race, ethnicity, by sexual orientation, by political affiliation. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process.
I think when marijuana was legalized, certain people thought it was going to have a detrimental impact on the communities. The communities themselves, the municipalities in Massachusetts, came up with a fund that these cannabis businesses would have to pay into to help remediate the damage that everybody thought it was going to create. Your study looks a little bit into that. How much damage did these cannabis shops create in the 24 states where they're legal with the, I think, 37 people that you surveyed
Correct.
For the report?
Yeah. Well, according to the 37 people we spoke with, no one used the word damage. There were definitely some negative aspects of the policy that people talked about. For example, it was pretty common for people across the country in different states to describe the policy as being way too overregulated. The hoops that people have to jump through to open dispensaries, to gain access to the industry, it's really challenging, and that's especially true for small business owners. So some of these larger corporations, maybe larger corporations from out of state, have the infrastructure, have the time, have the attorneys, have the money to go through all of those steps, but the average small business owner really doesn't, and so that's very prohibitive and kind of against the spirit of the policy.
A lot of that fund that I was referencing, those have gone away largely. Yeah. When you think about, they're not asking liquor stores, your husband who's been on the show sells wine, mm-hmm. They're not asking liquor stores or wine salesmen to be paying back into the communities, and I think there's a good argument to be made that alcohol does far more damage societally mm-hmm. than marijuana does. What's your take on why those funds were started, and do they still exist, and should they still exist?
I think the funds were started because it was a brand new experience for all of us to live in a time where yesterday something was illegal and had been for all of our lives, and then today it's legal. And so there are people who were really frightened by that, and people who sort of drank the Kool-Aid around how, the war on drugs and how dangerous cannabis is, and policymakers felt that they had to address that by putting in additional safeguards. And in Massachusetts, part of that had to do with the host community impact fees, where the dispensaries could be charged an extra 3% to offset traffic concerns funds and things like that. Maybe like police officers have to direct traffic, and that could be really burdensome
Which
on
was
towns.
true at the first
was
dispensary
true.
here in
It
Northampton.
was true for like the first 18 months of Northampton.
But again, that was because it was one of only 2 dispensaries in the state. And
Right.
so that was just sort of the growing pains of a totally new industry and like the novelty of
Parking was insane.
Yeah.
But along those lines, it feels like every state put in one of those funds. But one of the things that your study found was that it seemed like nobody who knew about these funds knew where those funds were going.
that actually speaks more to general tax revenue that's coming from the cannabis industry. You know, everything is taxed unless you live in a state with no sales tax. But that was one of the really unifying themes around cannabis legalization in Massachusetts and elsewhere is like when we legalize cannabis, it's going to bring all this money into the community, and that'll be great. We can invest it in schools, we can invest it in substance use prevention programming. And so when we were speaking with folks, that was initially described as like a positive, but then as we sort of chatted about it further, it became clear that people weren't really very sure how any of those funds, how that tax revenue was actually being used. And so it was framed initially as a positive and then like an opportunity for improvement. People really want to know, oh, we just built this beautiful new park paid by cannabis tax revenue, you know, something like that, a little more accountability and dissemination of information from policymakers.
This is kind of ironic because, like, it feels like the cannabis dispensaries around here really love putting their names on things anytime they support them. So it's not as if they don't want you to know that these
Absolutely.
funds are going to places.
And
So-
that could also be their own decisions for advertisement purposes, for community support purposes, and may not have to do specifically with those funds where they were at times being mandated to give
Right.
over a percentage of that.
Yeah. There's the community impact fee, which has largely gone away, but the tax revenue is something that will always be here, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to be creative around how municipalities are using that tax revenue, and it's not really up to the dispensaries themselves at this point.
We're speaking with Turners Falls-based researcher Faith English, Dr. Faith English, senior public health researcher.
I prefer Dr. Weed, actually.
Dr. Weed instead of Dr.
They
English.
call me Dr. Weed.
Good morning, how are you? I'm
Dr. Weed.
One of the things that is interesting about this study is one of the things that has been most interesting to me personally, who doesn't partake except for like once every 2 years when I have a massive psychotic break and think I can see how the entire universe fits together, which is wonderful and terrifying at the same time. I was a kid though who grew up buying illegal drugs on the street, and that's not good or safe. And my parents hated that. Now my dad is curious about gummies and things like that. All of my aunts and uncles are taking weed gummies all the time. Talk about how perceptions have changed since the legalization. That comes across in this study called I Like Not Having to Go Behind the Dumpster at Taco Bell, which is what I used to have to do,
right.
buying drugs from people named Donkey and Sleepy and other of the 7 dwarves.
Donkey is not a dwarf.
I know, but it might as well be.
Yeah, this was like by and large one of the biggest positive things that folks shared about with cannabis legalization is that it has been totally destigmatized and normalized in society. And so that has made people feel less sort of ashamed and embarrassed about their own cannabis use. It's super socially acceptable to have a glass of wine at the end of the day, but up until fairly recently, it was much less socially acceptable to say like, oh, I eat a gummy every night. That's a good thing. It means that people are talking about it. They're not like feeling like they have to keep this a secret. And a lot of people really highlighted how even though adult use cannabis legalization is what we were sort of asking about, many people really framed their appreciation of the policy as being an increased access to medical cannabis use or cannabis generally, but we're using it for medical reasons. And so sort of the line between medical use and recreational use, I think, blurs a lot for people because a lot of folks we spoke with identified like the mental health reasons to use cannabis, like it helps you sleep, it helps them with their anxiety. And so having the stigma really go away in significant ways has been hugely beneficial. And like as you were saying, other people are curious about it now. It's no longer illegal. You can go to these nice dispensaries that are safe. You know the cannabis has been tested. There's not going to be any mold or other kind of like pesticides.
Laced with LSD.
Right, which
I don't know who that might have happened to. Thanks a lot, Donkey.
and the sketch factor has gone away. Like, you know, you don't have to go meet up with some guy, especially like as a woman too. That adds a whole other layer of sketchiness and risk involved with buying cannabis, which for some people it helps them for a lot of really important medical reasons, which is not to diminish recreational use because that is also fine. But yeah, I think normalization and the reduction in stigma is really huge.
Speaking of that reduction, there's acknowledgement from both the members of your study and the team doing the research of how racially skewed legislation around cannabis has been, but there wasn't anything brought up about recidivism or any legislation that's come out to try and expunge some of that and try to restore some normalcy for folks who went to jail for nominal amounts of weed or for growing weed. And California's gone even further in having like whole programs trying to get folks who were in jail for growing weed back out and into cannabis business, which is what they were doing before. Did you notice your sample's small.
Which I will say for a qualitative study, this is a pretty large sample size.
Yeah.
But my first response is our interviews were about an hour long, and our interview guide was a couple pages long and included quite a few questions that touch on the war on drugs, the extent to which people are in support of or even aware of any of the social justice implications of cannabis legalization. And so our research team is very excited to dive back into our data and write more papers for the purposes of this report, which is already like way too long for a report.
Well, the summary is 17 pages. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Well, we did a lot of cutting, but yeah.
We read like 400-page books all the time. When you get a 17-page study to read, you're like, oh, this is going to be an easy day at work.
Yeah, no, we talked about it a lot. In this particular report, I think it comes up a couple of times where some people spoke to the economic benefits of cannabis legalization and how it has both brought new businesses into their communities as well as brought some jobs in. And some people specifically said that's helpful for people who maybe were working in the illicit market previously and they never knew those skills could be marketable, and so they are able to gain access to the industry. But no, that's a huge, huge component of cannabis legalization. To what extent can we address the harms done by the war on drugs? And in Massachusetts and in other states, there is a huge social equity component where in theory the states are reinvesting in communities that have been disproportionately impacted. That was sort of another reason the topic of tax revenue came up for a lot of folks, is like, are we actually doing that? I don't really know. So there's a lot of room for improvement around making the public more aware, one, if and how states are actually doing that, and if they're not really doing it, like, let's look at how much revenue's coming in and let's be a little bit more intentional about, for example, providing scholarships for folks who maybe have a felony record for a cannabis-related offense and they can't take out federal student loans and go to college. So I think a program like that, for example, would be really helpful.
Because I got high, because I got high. Because I got high.
More coming up with Dr. Weed, Faith English, as we explore the results of her recent study, I Like Not Having to Go Behind the Dumpster at Taco Bell, and learn more about some of the perceived negative impacts their survey subjects mentioned, the question of this November's ballot measure to undo the legalization, and more.
After which, we'll see an advice column connect us to more of the human condition than it expects in the last play of Chester Theater's season, Dear Alien.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
We're on Strong Avenue in Northampton talking about marijuana with Dr. Weed, Turners Falls, Faith English, and the new study I Like Not Having to Go Behind the Dumpster at a Taco Bell. There were some negative impacts that came up in the study. Talk about the ones that sort of rose to the top for you, about the people that you surveyed, what the most negative impacts have been now that cannabis has been legalized for several years here in the Commonwealth and beyond.
Sure, yeah, above and beyond cannabis being over-regulated and sort of structured in a way that's prioritizing larger corporations to dominate the market, a lot of people described having public health concerns. And so this was a surprise to us in the sense that I think when we think about who supports cannabis and who opposes cannabis, there's sort of this assumption that people who oppose cannabis are the ones who care the most about our young people, and that's really important, and that the people who support cannabis legalization really just don't care about it that much. And what we found in this study was that cannabis consumers in states that have had established markets for more than 5 years are concerned about young people using cannabis more. None of them really provided anecdotal evidence where they saw that teenagers are using cannabis more, that they have greater access, but that's definitely a concern that people voiced, and that they are hoping and expecting their lawmakers to continue to make sure that young people aren't able to access cannabis from any of the dispensaries. People also really talked about how high the potency is of cannabis products and how difficult difficult it can be to manage dosage, especially for folks who maybe aren't regular cannabis users and they're curious about trying it now since it's legal. You go into a dispensary and, the bud tenders are super helpful and can give you as much information as they have, but it's really easy to take too much given how high potency some of these products can be. And there were a lot of folks who really reflected that they wished that there was, like a Miller High Life equivalent, some like low ABV.
The champagne of weed.
Like I know my parents talk about like in the 70s, weed was not as strong, and like it's a shame that we don't still have cannabis that's kind of weaker for those of us who really can't handle those.
But don't we? I mean, you can get different levels of how many milligrams and all
Yeah,
that.
but I mean, like, it's an individual thing. How it works with your body is not necessarily a guarantee that it will work the same way that, like, somebody tells you it's going to
Well,
work.
the thing that's nice is if you go and get 5 milligrams of a thing and you say that's too much, you might be able
You
to get
can
something that's
titrate.
lower and go, exactly, as opposed to, again, going back to Donkey
Go low and slow.
Sleepy,
Yeah.
whatever he had that day is what I'm getting.
And, above and beyond that, folks really talked about just like a lack of transparency from policymakers around some of the decisions that are being made around cannabis legalization and really wanting more opportunities for constituent involvement in like how these policies are actually enacted on the ground level.
I'm curious whether the folks who answered your survey had an understanding of the friction that occurs in the states that have legal cannabis between state regulation and federal regulation.
Yeah, definitely. Some people spoke about working at places that do random drug checking, and that was definitely a symptom of the fact that cannabis remains illegal on the federal level. So living in a state where it's legal for adult use and then all of a sudden your employer decides to do drug checking and cannabis is not allowed is directly related to that tension. And so people were really frustrated by that. There is also a sort of a disconnect between, folks who might live in federally subsidized housing, for example, and those folks are not legally allowed to use cannabis at all in their apartments. And so where are they supposed to use it? Like on the sidewalk when you're walking around. And so that was another thing that people talked about is like kind of a negative. They weren't super bothered by it, but a lot of people noticed like it smells like weed everywhere.
That is true. That would be my number one negative. When I went to New Orleans, I was like, oh, it smells like chicory. Oh, no, wait a minute. It's just weed. It smells like weed all the time here.
And that, I would say that that's true too. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that there's no public place you can go and legally consume cannabis. And so like you can go to a bar and drink alcohol. People really called for wanting something similar for cannabis. There's one person I spoke with who's like, I don't drink alcohol. I don't want to go to a bar, but it's nice to get out of my house.
Yeah.
What if there was like a cannabis cafe I could go to and like wear my sweatpants and there's a comfy couch and we watch Disney movies and play board games and like get high?
And that's kind of in the works.
Yeah, it is.
For Massachusetts.
Yes, it is. I think somebody in your study mentioned a place in, I think Oregon has them.
One of the other negatives that show up in this study is marketing towards kids. And we talked a little
The
bit.
candification.
Yeah. Do we have any data that supports that kids are more attracted to it because there's flavors? Like the thing, Massachusetts banned flavored tobacco, so you can't buy menthol
Yeah, and I-
anymore.
and I was
which is,
going to say,
in
like-
my mind, the dumbest thing in the whole world. Like, yes, if kids are going to smoke, maybe they want menthol, but maybe they don't. Is it marketing to kids when it's flavored like mint or when it's shaped like a gummy? Or and is there actual data that says kids are being drawn into it because of that?
I think a bit of both. We do know that with electronic cigarettes, a lot of those were marketed to young people with like cotton candy flavors and all of these
But
like.
don't adults like cotton candy too?
Well, and
Not
yes,
as-
plenty
Yes.
of adults like candy as well. I don't know. I think having edibles that are like fruit flavored is fine. Maybe don't have cartoons on the packaging, but I know here in Massachusetts there are some pretty strict rules about the packaging and the labeling.
Adults like cartoons too.
They do.
Don't look at me when you say that.
I also like cartoons.
When you go to a dispensary in Massachusetts and across the country, they card you at the door and they card you again when you're at the counter. They are doing a really good job of making sure that young people aren't getting into the dispensaries themselves. As a young person, I remember, you play the Hey Mister game with alcohol. I don't think that's really happening with dispensaries with young people. So I think that they're doing the best that they can.
This study, I like not having to go behind the dumpster at Taco Bell, is pretty recent. The Parabola Institute is behind it. You, Faith English, are one of the co-authors of the study. As we move forward, continuing on into the cannabis era, depending on how this ballot question goes in Massachusetts, where they're trying to re-illegalize cannabis, what do you think some of the best practices Massachusetts should institute to continue on the path that we're going with cannabis?
The finding that cannabis consumers really care about public health and are concerned that young people might have increased use and that the potency is too strong, like all of those considerations are sort of a bridge between cannabis proponents and cannabis opponents. And I think the state needs to do a better job of unifying that message and conveying to the general public that these concerns are being addressed. And I think the findings from this study really demonstrate that cannabis supporters, cannabis consumers really care about a lot of the same issues that the people who are behind the repeal effort in Massachusetts are sort of purporting to be like their platform.
The thing I got most out of this is that I wanted to see more of it, especially because like Massachusetts is pretty heavily represented in this. Like we're almost a quarter of the survey answerers.
Yep. Stay tuned. As I said, we have so much data that we're excited to dig back into. We also were really surprised and happy with our representation from the LGBTQ community across the country, and are planning on doing a deep dive into some of the insights shared by that group. So yeah, we're excited to continue to analyze our data, and we'll be publishing more on the Parabola website, but also submitting to some peer-reviewed journals as well.
It was also really nice to see across the board everybody really wanting more access to local shops as opposed to corporate shops for their weed. Everybody kind of wants to buy from their local shop. They don't necessarily want to go to the Walmart for weed.
Yeah.
Be a local hero. Buy locally grown.
Right. Some people spoke to feeling a little frustrated that it wasn't immediately clear which one is local and which one isn't. I mean, we know, like, if I want to go to a coffee shop, I know, like, this one is a corporate chain and this one is a local one. It's, like, a little bit easier to suss out, and I think that isn't as easy among the cannabis dispensaries. But cannabis consumers are at this point, like, really well informed and have a lot of knowledge about the market, and so are doing their best to, like, shop responsibly in the ways that they do in the rest of their lives.
Shout out to Six Bricks.
Yeah, Six Bricks, Springfield, right around the corner from us.
And one of the only black-owned weed shops in the state.
There's definitely more work to be done.
Do you partake yourself, or do you just make studies, or do you care not to say?
I, similar to you, Monty, tend to go down an existential crisis road whenever I consume cannabis. And so I don't necessarily need that at the end of the day when I'm just trying to, like...
We need your husband, Adam, to give us some good wine from Oz wine.
Although, actually, Adam is leaving Oz. He left Oz and is now working for Dean's Beans.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be the coffee and weed house instead of the coffee and booze house.
And you can read Faith English's study on the effects of legalized cannabis, or at least the perceptions of the public on legalized cannabis, for yourself through the Parabola Center's website.
In the company of a number of other interesting studies with the ideas about federalization of cannabis, general AI usage, countering monopolization in markets, and more.
Yeah, it's really cool. Now we head to the Gem of the Valley to talk about the closing production for Chester Theater, Dear Alien.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. The Chester Theater presents Dear Alien, a play by Liz Duffy Adams, directed by Michelle Ong Hendrick. It runs now through August 23rd at Chester Town Hall Theater.
In this cheeky existential comedy, a reclusive advice columnist known as Dear Alien attempts to finish a book, respond to their readers, help the lovelorn, enlighten the confused, avoid financial ruin, hide from online trolls, escape desolation, and explain the nature of human existence, all under a deadline.
To talk about this latest production and the last of the 2026 season at Chester Theater are playwright Liz Duffy Adams and artistic director Michelle Ong Hendrick.
Liz Duffy Adams began her theatrical life as a performer, receiving her BFA in acting at New York University, where she trained first at the Stella Adler Academy and then at Experimental Theater Wing. She went on to write, devise, and perform a series of experimental theater pieces at various downtown venues and act in off-Broadway productions of Macbeth, Tartuffe, and Love for Love. Eventually, she wrote her first play, A Fabulous Beast, which was produced by the late One Dream Theater in Tribeca, starring Edie Falco.
Wow.
And got her MFA in playwriting from the Yale School of Drama. She's since completed 13 other plays, has 2 working, including Dear Alien, which gets its second performance ever at the Chester Theater.
Michelle Ong Hendrick is an accomplished director, teacher, producer, and actor. She's been resident stage director for the University of Connecticut Opera Theater and founded the Hartford Opera Theater, and has over 25 years experience teaching at the university level with a track record of developing equitable diverse, and accessible classrooms and rehearsal spaces. She's currently the co-artistic director of Chester Theatre Company here in the 413 and a visiting assistant professor at Trinity College. Welcome to you both.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And she used to do figure skating.
Well,
Yeah, a long time ago.
Liz Duffy Adams, who has written this play, Dear Alien, you are in Northampton?
Yeah, I'm in Northampton and New York City. I now refer to myself as biographic.
I love that.
Nice.
Tell us about the genesis for Dear Alien. Where did this idea for this play come from?
Well, it was mainly because I was addicted to reading advice columns. And I always say I don't believe in guilty pleasures because if it's a pleasure, you should not feel guilty.
I feel the same way.
But I did wonder if it was a bit of a waste of time, and it made me think about what was so addictive about them, what was so appealing and compelling about them, and the way that there are these little glimpses into lives that you would otherwise no way of glimpsing. So, for a playwright, I thought, okay, you could call that research. But
When you can turn your guilty pleasure into a tax write-off, do it.
that's always the goal. And I have a tendency to write historical or science fiction plays, like sort of past and future, kind of as an oblique way of looking at the present, which I find interesting, and thinking about how history is a cycle and how people are always the same. But I wanted for a change to really ground it in the present. So I thought, all right, a present-day advice columnist, and also the great experimental playwright Eric N. once said, all plays begin in ruin. So I put this guy through it, basically.
Michelle Hendrick, this is only the second time this play has been put on stage. How did you find out about this play and what made you want to bring it to Chester?
So Chris, who is my husband and also the other co-artistic director, knew about this play and had met Liz and is a great admirer of Liz's work and of Liz as a person. Somehow he had it. Maybe, I don't know, was it through you, Liz?
Yeah.
Maybe
He reached out and I sent it to him.
And then he gave it to me to read, and I just fell in love with it. And I said, I have to be the one who directs this.
Michelle, tell us about the appeal of Chester Theatre. You've done a lot of work in the Hartford area, University of Connecticut Opera Theatre and the Hartford Opera Theatre and Trinity College. Talk about coming into this, as they call it, Gem of the Valley, Chester Theatre, a playhouse ensconced in a town hall with the senior center in the basement.
Yeah, and the police department also.
Oh, yes, right.
in
I
the
forgot the
basement.
police department is there as well. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Amherst, and I went to UMass, and I had heard of Chester when it was starting back in the 80s, but never visited. And then I went off to different places, and I went to graduate school in North Carolina and still hadn't visited Chester, and actually didn't really know much about it until my daughter, who is also an actor, went to Smith College and was being mentored under Daniel Kramer, who was the former artistic director, and she became an intern at Chester. And so then we had reason to start to go to the shows. And I just fell in love with, it's an incredibly special town and place. It's like this pop-up theater that happens in the summer and, has this like incredible audience that is really into being, I don't know, maybe socially rigorous in the discussions and in the aftermath of the play. People want to talk about the themes and it's a meeting place. So I just really became very enamored of this magical little theater. We're so, so happy that we are able to sort of shepherd this theater for a while.
We're speaking about the final play in Chester Theatre's run this summer, Dear Alien. That's the director, Michelle Ong Hendrick, and we're here with the writer of Dear Alien as well, Liz Duffy Adams.
Liz, have you had other plays done at Chester Theatre?
No, this is my debut with Chester. I'd never even been there.
Really?
Oh, wow.
I was just there for a rehearsal a couple of days ago, and oh my goodness, it's a magical little spot.
You got to go to the train museum around the corner.
Yes.
Yes.
Totally do. I
Yeah.
wrote a play once called The Train Play.
Well, maybe you can do it in the train museum as part of Chester Theatre in a upcoming season.
You have made this pitch twice now.
I know. I love it. I full disclosure, it was in the
It's such a
play
good
at
idea.
Chester Theatre years ago.
Oh,
And it was
that's incredible.
It was a wonderful time.
How different is the staging for Dear Alien here than it was in Houston?
Oh, so radically different, which
Oh, wow.
is absolutely thrilling. At the Alley Theater in Houston, the staging was in a very deep thrust. So it's like the audience is on two very long sides and then a short side, and it's almost in the round. And the way that director and that team dealt with the characters coming in and on and how they dwell in the space, how they interact with each other, completely different. And Michelle and I didn't have any conversations. I'm sure she didn't look at what they did. She just came to it with the actors and the designers with her own ideas. And I was so thrilled. It was a completely different approach.
Liz Duffy Adams, the name of your play is Dear Alien. You did mention how you like writing about sci-fi in your plays. What can you or will you be willing to disclose about the nature of the alien advice columnist?
Well, the character directly addresses that in the play, but I will say that another great experimental playwright, Mac Wellman, who I studied with at Yale, once gave me the advice, write a character that is secretly an alien and don't let anybody know. So that's always stuck in my mind. However, the odds are that Dear Alien is in fact perfectly human.
That is
But
the
it's
odds,
really
everyone.
Up to you.
Everyone who complains when we have our astronomer on about how aliens are real, there is no evidence that aliens are real, although we all believe that they are.
I want to believe.
We all want to believe. And the play is Dear Alien by Liz Duffy Adams, who is joining us in studio, and directed by the co-artistic director of Chester Theater. It's at Chester Theater now through August 23rd, Michelle Ong-Hendrick.
When artistic directors bring in a series of plays, they're thinking about how that course of conversation and story weaves, even though these plays are disparate. They're not necessarily connected, but there's some connection that they're thinking about when they're putting a season together. So talk about this play's placement in the Chester season, Michelle Hendrick.
That's such a great question. And I think we think a lot about positionality, like where each piece is going in terms of the season. We generally do 4 productions. We did 5 this season because we had 1 at Williamstown, but we had 4 on site at Chester. We'll talk it through just at the dinner table and seeing if this were a meal, what would be the relationship between each course. What does it mean to be coming into the space and into the summer, starting with this particular piece? We started with Buckminster. And then what does it mean to be leaving and going into the fall and closing out our season with Dear Alien? I really felt like this was the play that I wanted to close out the season and to be inviting the audience to sort of reflect on these larger ideas that Liz has so beautifully laid out for us and go back into the world. I always kind of think of the fall as being the new year. We've been through this season together. We've explored these themes. We're looking at the idea of what does the future hold and what is our potential in terms of our humanity. And this one particularly spoke to us as being the closing of our season and also the entry point into the new year.
Do we experience reader questions to the Dear Alien throughout the course of the play? And if so, is there one that you could titillate us with that the alien gets asked in the advice column?
Yeah, we hear a series of questions. There are actors who are playing the writers into the column. Somebody who writes in who's having a workplace crisis, which Dear Alien does not think he's going to be good at addressing, but it turns out to be a crisis of conscience that I think is something that we sort of wrestle with when it comes to sort of, I know this is going to sound terribly serious, but conspiracy with evil. When you want a good life, and that means you have a job that is in fact not good, not good for the world. And there are an awful lot of people who make their peace with that.
Yes.
But this person who's writing in is wrestling with it because he's having a nervous breakdown, because in his gut, in his visceral sense, he knows that it's not right. And he gets a little help from Dear Alien.
Michelle, I'm curious you've done a lot of opera. Are there things from opera that were useful for directing this particular show?
Yes, very much so. Maybe it's important to know that while I have directed a lot of opera, I am not really a musician and I'm not really a singer. And I also only speak English. So I'm sort of an interesting opera director.
Honestly, kind of the best kind, because like a lot of the people who are watching opera don't actually understand it. We rely on like the super text.
Right.
So,
and I actually feel like the reason that I can direct opera is because of my figure skating, which is another like strange segue. There was
It's
so
all the
much
things that
about-
Timothée Chalamet hates.
It is. It truly is.
Oh, Timmy.
How does the figure skating and the opera help with this?
It's because I felt like because I experienced Liz's writing as being physically magical, and I often direct from a physical point first as opposed to a psychological. It does get to a psychological place. It does get to an emotional place, my work, but my entry point is through time and space. I start with the actual set, the space, and look at like, what are the possibilities? How can people move in this space? What does it mean to have these props? How do we engage with them? And I actually think a lot of opera directors have to work that way too. It's kind of written in. I experience Liz as having that gift. Not only what Liz is saying is very, very profound, but how it's said and the rhythm of the piece, I experienced it as music. In some ways, it was a natural way for me to approach it.
The final play in Chester Theater's 2026 season is Dear Alien. It is running now through August 23rd at Chester Town Hall Theater in the Gem of the Valley, Chester, Massachusetts. And we've been joined by the writer of the play Dear Alien, Liz Duffy Adams from Northampton, and the director of the play and the co-artistic director of Chester Theater, Michelle Ong Hendrick. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. So much fun.
Thank you so much for having us.
oh, our pleasure. It is a really fun theater to be in, and they've had a really cool season. This is going to be a good way to
They
close it out.
always have an interesting season there at Chester. And if you like more about aliens, we had a lot of aliens on the show today. Tomorrow, Transformance, Pines Theater at Look Park. There's going to be a lot of space age, moon age, daydream,
Got a lot
alien,
of future-y things.
future-y stuff. Khaleesi's will be there with two bands. It's a benefit for the Northampton Schools, as you might have heard on Friday's show.
Yep. It'll be a lot of fun. You will be there as many aliens.
I will be many aliens tomorrow at Transformance, which is the place where I first met one of our guests who will be on the show tomorrow.
Indeed. On the next Fabulous 413, we head to the Hilltowns to check out the place that's got a cow on its roof, the Old Creamery Co-op.
And we'll have Jeremy Whalen, who is running for the 1st Congressional District. I met him first at Transformance.
Oh, hey.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, y'all.